Today we're going to talk about the third and final communication means, and that's writing. Contrary to popular belief, people still do read, and so there is a place for writing. And we'll talk about the background, the structure of how a simple paper should go, the paragraph, and the paragraph is critically important, and I don't think they talk about it enough. But basically, every paragraph should be a story. It should have a point, an entry, it should have detail to support it, and it should have a payoff in the end. And so your overall story also needs a payoff, which is being supported. So the thing we see really in this class is these patterns. Introduction, how do I get a hook to get them involved? Each supporting point, which are smaller stories within a larger story, and then finally the payoff. Why should we do writing? Why don't we just, do emojis? Well, one, you can clear up confusion with it. I mean, it can create confusion sometimes in writing. That's why they created things like JMHO. What it comes down to, though, is that writing is clear. There's no confusion because you're both looking at the same thing, or there's less confusion. You can go into a lot of detail in writing. When you're speaking on slides and all, you really can't go over a minute, but in writing, you can spend more time. And not only that, but you control the narrative through the entire thing. You're the one who's creating this piece of work. And so you have to think about how you're going to continue to keep them engaged. And not only that, but writing is record keeping. And that's, when you talk about legal contracts, what do they always say? People say, well, we had an oral agreement. The problem with that is that without something tangible, without some kind of tangible media, like a recording or something like that, nobody knows what it actually means. But something that's written, crystal clear. And not only that, your story becomes a record. One thing about myself, I'm immortal. And the reason why I'm immortal is long after I'm gone, you could put my name on the internet, and all those 30 papers I wrote will pop up. All my 30 patents will pop up. And so the thing is, there was authorship in those patents because somebody had to write it up. And that was me. When we talk about the scale of writing, the basic is email. That's pretty much the smallest form that we use right now, if you don't want to include like note passing, which people don't really do anymore. The memo, the paper, the short story, the novella, and the book. You can actually write a book. What it comes down to, though, is you have to master the other forms first, and then as you get larger and larger, you could be a part of that. The benefits of writing is that you've created something memorable that people can come back to. It's easy to share, and that there's some limitations with that, with slides. You're flexible to change. You can go back in and edit anytime you want to. You can take very complex stories and make them simpler. You can tackle very difficult topics. And you have a blank slate. That's the wonderful thing I loved about writing. And keep in mind, I started writing on the typewriter. But I would always get excited putting in that blank sheet of paper and then start to peck away. Of course, it's not that easy. What is the key? The writer's discipline. When you write, why is each and every word there? And when you can master that, then you can write like a professional. But pretty much, people's writing tends to be poor because it veers off too much, or there's just too much clutter. And once again, we see this theme. Word economy. Is it clear? Is it direct? Is it concise? Does it have modulation? Here's the thing about when people write. They tend to write, all their sentences are like the same length. It becomes monotonous. There's actually a rhythm to writing. The way you break up your paragraphs. You can make short little statements, which are payoffs. There are lots of things you can actually do with the written word that people don't do. And of course, there's the payoff. How satisfying is it going to be? Now, here are some of the big mistakes that I see in students writing, and it makes me have a total conniption. First of all, run-on paragraphs. I've literally gotten paragraphs that have been 1 page long. The general rule for paragraphs is you should keep it to 15 lines or less. Sometimes you can go up as high as 20, but in general, you should try to keep it under 15. And that forces you to be concise in your ideas. Things that students write, I think. And so I write down kind of nasty comments, but it speaks to it. And so when students write, I think, and it's like, are you telling me you don't think? It's my opinion. Okay, whose opinion were you going to give me then? Cliches. At the end of the day, now here's the problem in people's writing. Why do you say I think or it's in my opinion? And it's because in speech, that's okay. But in writing has to be objective. You need to have a point and you need to believe in that point. And when you say I think or it's my opinion, you're trying to have it both ways. Meaning, this is the point I'm trying to make, but I just think it. So if it turns out to be wrong, it's okay. Or if somebody comes up with something better. No, if you believe something in writing, you put it down on paper and you stand by it. And if you cannot do that, then do not write it. And that's where writing is different than speech. In speech, it's okay to say, well, I think we oughta to hedge things back. But you can't get away with that when you're putting something in writing. And a lot of people write things based on cliches about things that they've heard. And so avoid things like at the end of the day or something like that. But weak writing, what all this runs up to, is afraid to take ownership. It's your writing. We use cliches and things like that so we don't have to put ourselves out there. Here are some of the other big mistakes. Grammar matters. If you have participles or incomplete thoughts or whatever, grammar matters. Don't write like you talk. Well, it's sort of like really awesome that he did that, and a lot of people... It's really funny because in high school, I couldn't take AP History because it conflicted with AP Biology that I was taking. So I got put in regular history. And the teacher there knew me quite well. I had other classes with them. And right away he starts apologizing to me. You shouldn't be in here. I feel so bad that you're stuck. But unfortunately, don't hold back on what you're doing. And what he was referring to is that I had been in so many AP classes, I wasn't used to regular students anymore. And so we were supposed to give a paper about and read it to the class about some historical figures. And we were all randomly given presidents. This one guy gets up there. Well, Dwight, he was like a really awesome general. And he won the war and everything. And because he was just so awesome, they made him president. And and he kept referring to him as Dwight, meaning Dwight Eisenhower. And my poor history teacher is there like, President Eisenhower, President Eisenhower. So don't write. Now, there's a difference between voice and writing like the way you talk. And voice means is, what is the style of your narrative? How do you come across? Obviously, when you look at your TEM professors, we all have very, very different voices, and we come across differently. I'm the East Coast snarky sarcastic guy. Professor Griffin is a loving mother in her classes. She really comes across as she cares about you. Chavez, bombastic, big voice guy. And that's what your voice is. But when you write, the thing about writing is things become amplified. For example, if you're talking to people, you can say the word fuck, and it's not that big a deal. On the other hand, when you put that in writing, it screams. And that's why whenever I use profanity, I don't write the entire word out. I write like SH-T. So it takes some of the edge off. But when you write it in direct terms, it's just too much. Avoid sexist writing. Like, for example, where no man has gone before. No, it's where no human has gone before. Okay, this isn't being overly sensitive or anything like that. The main reason why you do it is because you want inclusivity. You want everybody to feel like they're a part of it. And when you use terminology like where no man has gone before, it really hurts you. The meaning of words matter. Our team won. A student literally wrote that to me. I think I almost had an aneurysm. He affected a change. No, that's wrong. Affect is the verb form. Effect is the noun. Here's the problem. When you make those kind of mistakes, it screams out of the paper. And then all of a sudden people are thinking more about the mood and the narrative, and everything else in the paper changes because people are too fixated on your mistake. Pronouns matter. In this sentence, John, Tom, and Billy, and he went south while we went north. Who's who? And so you have to be careful about how you use your pronouns. And write in your own voice. When I first started writing, I started writing like F. Scott Fitzgerald. I was using this really formal tones, just like what was written here. And my writing teacher came to me and said, "Is this really your voice?" Now, I actually knew some writers who that was their voice. They were very formal, and they were very consistent about it. But then I realized I'm a Jersey guy. I'm not. Now, keep in mind, this has to do with fiction. However, what I started writing are things like, he came in through the door and clearly he was totally exhausted. His eyes looked like two piss holes in the snow. Now, you know what that looks like. And that's the way people in New Jersey talk. And so, write in your own voice. In terms of developing your voice, it's about your personality. How quickly do you talk and pace? Your tone, your word choice. How do you structure your sentences and paragraphs? I know I have one major flaw in my voice, and that's that I tend to pause. When people talk to me, I pause. And some people find it incredibly irritating. And other people think, wow, he really thinks about things. So it depends the audience around you. I once dated a girl. I don't know how on earth we dated for 10 years. I really don't. But someone would come up to me and say, "Would you like a drink?" And I wouldn't say anything right away. And why? Because this is the way my brain works. And unfortunately, I'm stuck with it. When somebody asks me, "Do you want a drink?" all of a sudden, what do I see? I see decision trees. All of a sudden, it's like, do I want a drink? Yes or no? Hot or cold? Is it rude for me to ask for this? Is it not rude to me to ask for this? Are they asking this because they sincerely want to go get a drink for me? Or are they saying this just to be polite? I mean, all these permutations just start spouting out of my head, and that's why I don't answer right away until she would hit me. Anyway, what I want you to do is, this is the simplest paper, and students should have learned this in high school, and it appalls me that they can't do it. The simplest paper is called the 3-point paper. You have an introduction, you have 3 points that support it, and then you have a conclusion. In every paragraph is a story that supports the main story. For example, let's look at the structure of the story, The Three Bears. And so what happens? These bears leave their home. Their home is vulnerable to intruders. And so the beginning of the story is what happens to them when trouble happens. And so what supported this? That they were vulnerable. Goldilocks comes along. Evidence that somebody sat in their chairs, ate their food, slept in their beds. And then the conclusion is, and somebody's sleeping on my bed, and there she is. There's a big payoff, the excitement through the story. And so through searching, they found the intruder, and they helped Goldilocks get home, and everybody lived happily ever after. That's a very simple form of what a 3-point story is, and yet students can't do it. If you are writing a research paper, and that's the thing, every piece of technical work you do, it varies between like fiction, a business article, and a technical paper. In a technical paper, the papers are dry, and they follow basically a standard format, and that's that your abstract is a synopsis of the paper. What it comes down to is people like me who want to learn about, is your paper worth reading to me? It all comes out in the abstract because it's a nice little summary, and then you decide if you actually want to read it. The introduction lays out the entire problem, solutions people have tried, and what approach you chose to take. And so you justify that approach. And your hypothesis, what you think the solution is going to be, how did you set up your experiment, summarizing your results, your conclusion, and then you have to have references. Why do you have references? You have references because when you lay out the entire problem and the possible solutions, then you're looking at what other people did. And you can't write about them without giving them credit for what they did. Now, in terms of structure example, here's the problem, here's a solution. Education is important for entrepreneurship. The way it's taught today is split in 3 directions. And so the 3 different kinds of entrepreneurship are turning research into products, small business, like opening a cupcake stand, and finally, scalable entrepreneurship, which is about technology. And so you explain the different techniques and the pros and cons. And an ideal platform for this was if you had this, and our solution addresses this. So introduction, conclusion, and the points that support it. So the draw is the problem that you're talking about. How are you going to support it? How are you going to lay it out? And what is your summary? That's the structure of the paper you're trying to do. And for example, in these papers, you need to be explicit. This paper, what your introduction does is it lays out what you're going to be writing about. So it says, this is talking about a new kind of airbag which deploys for people on motorcycles. And so it says the design of the bag, the materials and fabrication techniques, and the testing. So the next paragraph would talk about design, the next paragraph will talk about materials, and the next one will talk about testing. That's what your introduction does. It is a map to what the paper is about. And paragraphs have to flow. So I'll leave you to read all this. But if you notice, it talks about the introduction about wind. And then the introduction, the crux of the paper starts a little late, but it says this paper focuses. Be explicit. Results of this review are used to draw conclusions about wind turbine and health effects using a weight of evidence approach. And so naturally that's your conclusion and your payoff. And so the introduction, so this is what an abstract looks like. And it's just, now normally you don't have these subheadings, and normally it's a lot shorter than this. It's normally about this size. But the intro summarizes the knowledge up to date of what you need to look at. To get another feel for it, this is a paper that Professor Chavez and Professor Bronowitz and I wrote. And the abstract of the summary, and then the introduction. And this is where it's okay to use bullet points, where you have specific lists. And it finally summarizes why this is important. And so the first thing this talks about is the map. In terms of formatting, this is a formatting of the IEEE. And this is one of the big standards that they use. And it tells you how typing and everything is laid out. And that's important for formal papers. In terms of the middle of the paper, your hypothesis should be like this. And so if you read this, the peer-reviewed studies, and so it lays out the points. And if you notice each of these, people tend to notice sound from wind turbines almost linearly with increasing sound and pressure. The proportion of people that notice sound from wind find it annoying. So this pretty much tells you what it is, and then this tells you, you see how it builds one after another. But first you have to establish the first of it. This talks about data from 40 top universities in the middle, the methodology that we use. And so these were the mathematical tests we did to figure out why Now, this is a totally different paper. This is a paper I actually wrote with Jessica Sarceda, who's one of the TEM legends. She's a product manager at Apple right now. And what we did is answer the question, why do some universities... And it's really funny because it was a shits and giggles paper, meaning she said she wanted to write a paper because she wanted to beef up her academic credentials. And I said, sure, I'll write a paper with you. And then we bandied some ideas about, and then we used to have a living learning community called Startup Village. And the director of the Poly School at the time said, why doesn't Startup Village produce any billion-dollar companies? And the president of Startup Village said, well, when you start creating billion-dollar research, we'll start producing billion-dollar companies. And so that raised an interesting question. Is it about the business school or is it about the engineering school? What drives entrepreneurship at universities? And as it turns out, it's both. One is not more important than the other. And that makes a ton of sense. This is when I talk about sanity checks after you do things. The reason why it makes sense is engineering gives you content, and once you have content, you have to turn it into a business. And so you actually need both. You just can't have one. And this is my problem with the way entrepreneurship is taught. They don't teach you about the complexities of how it could be more than one reason and how things interact and how those interactions can create other variances. And so I think we teach you to be a little bit too simplistic and not enough with depth and rigor. Anyway, when you sit down and think about it, who are the best entrepreneurship schools? MIT, top 2 engineering school, top 5 business school, Stanford, top 3 engineering school, top 5 business school. And so when you see Berkeley, when you see the top universities, that's what you find out. If you're writing a longer paper and have data, now we're talking about, remember, picture, story. Always the story first, and then pictures, and then numbers. And so when you're writing something technical, it's got to be like that. The last paragraph or two, there's one of 2 approaches where you close off a paper. One is you build up to your payoff, or loop it back to the very beginning to close the paper together, or you give them a preview of what future work needs to be done, or this is the stepping off point to do something even greater. The thing is, your conclusions, don't draw it out too long. Just summarize the highlights of what were the most important things that took place. Now, here's an example of pacing and writing. There was a game show called Pawnography. For those of you who have ever seen the History Channel, they had a show called Pawn Stars, where this pawn shop sells historical artifacts. And so they decided to make a game show out of it. And so the guy who owns the pawn shop and is a history buff, he would get like 20 questions in a booth. And then you would get 20 questions in a booth. And then you start negotiating over certain prizes. And maybe you make a deal and get something less, or do you go for the whole thing? And the winner is who can get the most questions correct. So I actually applied to be on the show. And so what's the big thing you want to do? Differentiate yourself. And so I sat down and thought about, what do people do with these things? Well, most people, who am I competing against? Communication, remember? The audience, and who else is also going to be presenting? And I thought about it, and I thought what most people do is most people are not good writers, and they're not very creative, and so they write stuff like, you know, I love this show, I watched every single episode, I think Rick is great. And since it's about history, what did I think about? Well, the question is, tell us about yourself and why you want to be on the show. And so, since this is a history program, I started off with education. And I used my go-to line, born of poor but noble parents. Right away, they know I am a different bird. I was raised in a family that believed in education. Subsequently, I was inspired or brainwashed. My little sarcasm, make it light with humor. And I totally name-dropped my degrees and also where I went to school. This program was filmed in Los Angeles. That's why out of all the other schools I went to, I put in UCLA. Now, what is the temptation? The temptation is to put every school down. And this is what I mean about word economy. If you make lists that long and all, you're just going to lose people. And so then my sarcasm, and this is a rhetoric technique. And go back and look at the second lecture, because I list out 20 different techniques. Try to learn like 3 or 4 of them, integrate it into your writing, because they can be very powerful. And so what do? One is long lists. I spent my career as an engineer and a manager and have 26 patents, 30 publications, 10 awards, and 1 invitation to speak at a junior high school. And this is my form of humor in writing, and that's that I take you down a road and then I veer off somewhere else. And so that contrast creates a response. Next thing I talked about after education is my career. I am currently a founder of a startup company. Having worked for a number of characters in my career, I decided that rather than follow some idiot off that cliff, I'd rather that idiot be me. Then they want to know about your family, something personal about you. And so here I kind of wax poetic. So I wrote, I have a wife who's the measure of my dreams, a daughter that makes me understand beauty, 4 children that remind me that I am blessed, and a dog that is a total goofus. And now they're seeing that pattern. And that's with these long lists. The problem is when you write something really long, people start to kind of lose it. And so all of a sudden there's the payoff at the end. Even these sentences or stories in and of themselves. And finally, they want to know you on a personal level. So that's why I wrote this about family. And how do you close it off? They want to know why you want to be on this show. And so I thought, well, this is about history. And this is about competition. And so I came up with this. It is my intention to wage an intellectual battle that will inspire the writing of songs, the commission of paintings, and the building of statues to commemorate one of the epic moments in the history of human competition. But most of all, it looks like fun. And once again, that was long-winded, but you can get away with long-winded if you have a payoff. what inspired me to write this, I was thinking, okay, well, this is competition in history. And okay, what are some of the great competitions in history? And it's like the Olympics. Where did the Olympics start? The Greeks. And then I started thinking of Star Trek. If I was in the Star Trek universe, I would totally be a Klingon. But this is what the Klingons always say. And there's like an episode with Commander Worf. And, here they're about to get slaughtered and killed. And he said, "This is a great day for battle. Think about the songs they're going to write about us." And everybody's looking at him like, I don't want to die. Now, what does this mean? Look at how I changed the length of sentences. A medium sentence, a long sentence. A medium sentence, a short sentence. But one thing you notice is that it ends on short comments. Now, this is a long sentence. However, this is a sentence. I'd rather that idiot be me. There's a payoff there. And so you can see what the pattern is in the writing. With your writing, you can create pacing. So here's another summary of all of it. And it ends with a payoff. And guess what? I got a phone call from them asking me to be a contestant on the show. I returned the phone call and they never called me back. Why? The show got canceled! I missed my chance of fame. Anyway, when I write letters of recommendation, here's an example of a paragraph. And so the things you're trying to do in your paragraphs is naturally you want to make them engaging. How is this information going to connect with them? Is there an example you can give? Story, pictures, numbers. So is there some kind of meat that you can refer to? Those are in effect your pictures and numbers. And what's the payoff? And so I had to write a letter of recommendation for Kyle Butler. Kyle Butler was an air management major. And he came to me and he said, I want to get an impact award. Can you nominate me? And I said, Kyle, why don't you ask a member from your own department? And he said, well, Dr. Cho, I've had a couple of classes with you and I'm totally convinced that you are a far better bullshitter than any of my professors. I was kind of like, okay, I could buy that. They ask about what kind of ambassador will this person make for the school. So it starts off, he is a superior ambassador for us. This is to a committee. This is my title sentence. Kyle has a very warm and sincere way of communicating. He uses word economy and has a great deal of emotional intelligence. He is aware of whom he is communicating with. Now, why am I talking about all this interpersonal stuff? Because if you're an ambassador, the first thing you really need to show is how do you connect with others. And then I talk about, here is rhetoric. He understands when to encourage, when to support, and when to push. Repeating things can be very effective. Otherwise, what would this look like? He understands encouragement, support, and force. Now, that's pretty bland. But this repetition of when to encourage, when to support, and when to push is an effective technique. So look at that list and just take a couple of them and try to integrate it into your writing. Word economy. Yes, you hear that over and over again. A lot of you tend to shotgun, and I expect it to come out in your writing, and you need to work on that. When in doubt, just be primitive. Don't have long sentences or something fancy or something. Just need what needs to be said. And so when you talk, you're trying to be smart. And in terms of visualization, if you use figures, font sizes, paragraphs, and spacings, how does that all work out? So visually, when you look at the paper, remember, people look at paper in an F pattern. And so do you maintain that? How do you make good papers? Talk to others. Have them read and feedback. Edit. This is one thing that students don't do, and it drives me crazy. Edit. And this is what the writer's discipline is all about. The story still matters. Although the format is longer, there's still these small details of making a story. Here's an example of a paper I wrote. We have to nominate someone to be our outstanding graduate, and that fell to me. And so the first thing you do is look at, remember, audience. And what does that audience want? And so I took the criteria of the submission and pasted it on the piece of paper so I could look at it. And this is it. The other thing about letters of recommendation is you have to be over the top. Meaning, if I say John is a little bit quiet, they interpret that as he doesn't talk at all. And so you got to play it up. Why? Because everybody's Superman. And if you say, well, he's not Superman, he's more like Nova, then it's not going to go over well. And not only that, but somewhere in this paper, you have to find ways to connect with people on a personal level. Nothing has changed about communication. So when I read this, it says, academic performance, classroom studies, and research experience. This is going to be hard to do because if you're an undergraduate, you may not have done any research, and most of you won't. And especially those of you who are online, you're not going to do it at all. And so contributions to the success of student organizations, they want you to be involved in some way. In the Fulton School's educational mission, what it comes down to is, what is Fulton School's educational mission? So guess what? You have to do some research. I looked it up and pasted it into the paper so I could see what it is. And so when we look at this, cultivate excellence, okay, that's pretty much standard with this. Deliver innovation that matters. The problem with that is that's not going to happen until you graduate. So here's another potential weak point where we can't check off the boxes. Because when you look at all these requirements, these are basically boxes. And so how many of these can you speak to? Bold thinking is about creativity. Learning and collaboration is about teamwork. And building a foundation is how do they support others. And so you try to do as many boxes as you can. But if it's a good story, then they'll overlook you missing a couple of things. But if you miss a lot of things, then you're in trouble. So when you write a paper, one of the best things you can do is do an outline. And sometimes I write outlines and sometimes I don't. But what I'll do on the piece of paper is just have a couple of words of each of the major points. These are the points of your story. And so the first point is my introduction. How am I going to make it memorable? But if these are the boxes I have to check off, then my introduction can speak to the missing points. But how do you make talking about you as an online student personal? Academic strength. Okay, the person obviously I'm nominating is going to be academically strong. So that takes care of these boxes. They've done knowing your subject matter. They've done community work, and at work, they've actually done some innovative things. So, okay, I get to check off those boxes. And then teamwork helps me check off those boxes. And then when you close, you need an ask. What is the point to all of this? And an even more powerful one is if you can, in your conclusion, loop the whole paper together, then that makes it really memorable. So this whole online thing, I sat down and thought about it. And actually, when we were picking nominees, they wanted to pick a campus student. And I objected. And I said, this is what's patently unfair. It's a lot easier for campus students to go ahead and be part of activities and stuff like that. But we should not ignore the achievements and accomplishments of our online students. Otherwise, the entire game is rigged against them. They bought it. Anyway, so I was thinking, well, gee, I actually, this student I'm nominating, Heidi, we exchanged a lot of emails and things like that, but I never met with her or anything like that. And then I thought about, why do we like online students? Why do we recruit them? What's special about them? And so those are the elements I sat down and talked about and started to writing about it. And so what did I write? I have to admit it. I have never met the person that I am recommending, Heidi Ball. I hope to rectify this by meeting her at graduation. She is an online student and community college graduate. And so I have a great deal of admiration for the community college graduates, because that's a long road for education. And yet your grit and determination, that's impressive. And so that's why I put it in there. She's also one of the most talented, hardworking, and conscientious students I have ever met. I enthusiastically recommend her for outstanding graduate from our department. Right away. That's my intro and hook. But I wanted to support that. So our online students tend to be overlooked because they are out of sight. However, these online students bring a tremendous experience, incredible insights, and an astonishing drive that enrich the educational experience and makes us a better university. Heidi is the epitome of what is best in our online students. And so I threw in another paragraph to reinforce the first one. But as you can see, they talk about different aspects. They're different stories. The next one, remember my outline? The next one is academic strength. She is committed to her studies and carries a 4.23 GPA. She's driven to getting the most out of her learning. I enjoyed her communications. She sought more than clarity. She was looking for insight and provided strong ones of her own. The next part, community work and innovation. I actually did not have time to know Heidi's background. So what did I do? Where did I get this stuff? LinkedIn. You knowing how to research and get information is important for communication. And so as it turns out, she started out in education. She wanted to become technical. And she's been doing her internship at Intel. And so she's been doing cutting edge stuff. And what she has written on LinkedIn is that she's been an innovator in terms of initiatives at Intel, and they've trusted her. Next part of the point is teamwork. In class, she is the consummate professional. And that ties in, remember transition? That ties into the previous one. She organizes her teams and understands when to help, when to push, and when to listen. Rhetoric. You see how much more powerful it is when you write something like that. She elevates those around her. Her teammates have written glowing things about her, and she's gotten a perfect 5 out of 5 in her reviews. Story. Consummate professional. The imagery of her working with other students, and then numbers. Makes a good story, strong story. The thing is, these letters can't be too long. So the ask is, please name her as outstanding graduate. And so this is what my first draft was. And then when you look at the entire thing, you start thinking about, okay, what's good or what's bad? And so she's the epitome of what is best in our online students. I realized I needed to bring that down. I mean, she's not a saint. This is really clumsy. She sought more than clarity. She was looking for insight and provided strong ones of her own. This is about communication, but you don't really make that connection. And it's just really clumsy writing. This is okay. This, yeah, she had good skills, but where's the payoff in this? The payoff is just some data. So this needs to be reinforced. And the ending just seems kind of short and curt. So, it's reinforced, but it doesn't loop back, and it doesn't touch on what the feelings are. So what did I do? I rewrote it. And then when you look at the rewriting, this stayed the same. This pretty much stayed the same. But what did I do? Instead of using the GPA in the beginning, I realized the GPA should be a payoff. So she is driven to getting the most out of her learning. Remember, title sentence, support, payoff. I enjoyed our conversation. She sought more than clarity in class. She was looking for insight and provided strong ones of her own in class. So now all of a sudden, that clears up what it was talking about. This attitude resulted in a 4.23 GPA. Payoff. This one is pretty much the same. Now remember, this ended as 5 out of 5. I added one sentence. She is now being considered for leadership positions at Intel. And so, payoff. That was missing. Now, the final paragraph. Heidi's mix of academic achievement and service to others is what we seek in students. I fervently support her being named Outstanding Graduate, and I am excited by the prospect of finally meeting her at graduation. Personal. Loops back to the beginning. When you read that, you remember that this is a grit and hardworking person online. And that description actually applies to a lot of you. Here's the thing. A lot of your professors right now use AI to write the recommendation letters. This goes back to Kyle Butler. In order to be an Impact Award winner, you have to be inspiring. And so, explicit. He is an inspiring figure. His life revolves around the care of others. And so, this led Kyle to become an emergency medical chopper pilot. For those in critical need, Kyle will be there for you. How do I put meat in this? This is going to a committee of professors. How am I going to connect? One thing about all of us, anybody who's worth his salt as a teacher will talk about the great students and the not so good students. And the great students, I don't know about everybody else, but I think they feel the same thing. You thank us, but honestly, I feel like it should be more, I should thank you. It's an honor to be your instructor. And so every professor feels that, and that was my connection. Some students make you feel like it's an honor. It's been an honor to have been their instructor. That's how I feel about Kyle. He's a student that reminds you of why you became a teacher. Another thing that we can all connect to. I was in industry for 30 years before joining ASU and served at the C-level of management. Credibility chops. I can say that I would have hired Kyle without hesitation. He's more than a student. He's inspiring. I enthusiastically support his candidacy. Now, there are other support things in that. But why did I bring that up? AI could never write that. And this is why, and subsequently, it's really funny because in my other classes, students try to cheat and use the AI to answer the questions, and they just get it wrong because I ask questions that AI can't answer. Because there are problems that require deep insight, not just surface stuff, and that's what AI is good at. So this is why your writing matters, your voice matters, and what you have to say matters. See how I use rhetoric there? If you have any questions, let me know.